Coming up in tonight's content coverage, our long break is finally over at last. F1 back in our lives. No, of course, we're talking Georgia football as game week is finally here for the first time since early January. Hello, all, and welcome into another edition of Connor and Coverage. My name is Connor Riley. We do this every Sunday night. Wrapping up the latest in Georgia football, what's going on. And of course, it's game week. The offseason is over. Georgia has officially moved into preparing for UT Martin. It is a game Georgia is expected to win handily, given that UT Martin is an FCS school and Georgia is the two-time defending national champion. And so with that in mind, there are a number of different ways we can choose to go in. But with tonight's show, I figure why not take a look at the biggest picture possible, the three-peat possibility. Georgia aiming to be the first team since Minnesota in the 1930s, the first team in the AP poll era to win 3 consecutive national championships. And well, yes, this season is obviously the own season. We'll get into that over the course of the rest of the year. I do think it's worth examining this feat from the 10,000-foot view angle. You've seen a number of my colleagues in the media put out their season predictions and also possible playoff predictions as well there. When you take a full step back, it's really hard to go undefeated. You just need a lot to go your way. Georgia saw that last year in the game against Missouri. It's difficult to win that many games in a row. Certainly even tougher when you do it over the course of 3 seasons, which Georgia has done. But on the other hand, when you get into a week-by-week scenario, you do see a path for Georgia certainly getting back into the playoff. And then as I think the Ohio State and TCU games showed us last year, so much of it in the playoff just comes down to matchup and who you're up against. And if you're a Georgia team that is as talented as they are, odds are they're going to have as good a chance as anyone in the country in terms of going out there and winning another national title. And doing it for a third straight time would be unprecedented in the modern college football era. Other teams have tried. A few have even gotten close. USC, most famously in 2005, Alabama got to 11-0 in the 2013 regular season, a team Kirby Smart was a part of, even though sometimes he selectively chooses not to remember that when asked about it. And so I think going into tonight, the exercise will be, these are guys that are sort of going to make or break Georgia's championship push. It could go in a number of different ways. I think some of these you feel better about than others. Others we're not going to know until late in the season, probably even either the SEC championship game or the college football playoff itself. And so we're going to do that tonight. Open it up to your questions, comments. Obviously, game week injury is a big thing to know coming out of this first week. I'm sure we'll touch on Georgia running back room, the latest there, what Georgia is doing there, given the number of injuries they have. I did watch a little college football last night. I saw some of the USC San Jose State game. Yes, I did find a way using the internet to find a way to watch that game, even though I do not have the Pac-12 network. Didn't watch a whole lot of Vanderbilt, but I will note that they only had 1.9 yards per carry against a Hawaii team. It is pretty concerning if you're an SEC fan and want to see that. Notre Dame looked good, but I think the bigger takeaway from that game is just Navy's really bad. And they might be one of the worst teams in the Power Five. They're not even Power Five, rather, but college football this year. Notre Dame, yes, they look good, but I don't know how much of that was Notre Dame and how much of that was just Navy just not being equipped to play a team of Notre Dame's caliber there. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and turn it back to the Georgia Bulldogs. And I think the biggest guy in terms of an individual is Carson Beck. He was named the starting quarterback for this team. He is going to be the guy that is tasked with leading them. I think given some of the injuries at the running back position and the way this offense is going to be tailored this season, a lot is going to fall on his shoulders. And I've seen some skeptics out there saying, don't discount what Stetson Bennett brought to the team a season ago. And I think that's a fair point to bring up. He was money in big games for Georgia last season. Tennessee, LSU, obviously the national championship game against TCU come to mind there. And on top of that, his legs were very important in those games. He had 10 rushing touchdowns. And I think that was something that Georgia's just not going to be able to replace this year if Carson Beck is, in fact, the guy there. But I think with what you saw in the spring game, what we've heard out of fall practice, and the way this offense, I think, is potentially tailored to mesh to Beck's skill sets, I think it's got a chance to be a very potent offense. It's going to look a little different than what other Kirby Smart offenses have looked like in the past. And obviously that goes into turnover with Mike Bobo becoming the new offensive coordinator with Todd Monken. But a lot's going to fall on Carson Beck's shoulders. But this is a guy who, yes, compared to some other players, a Jalen Milroe, or a Kyle McCord, a Devin Brown potentially at Ohio State. This guy's been in the Georgia program for 4 years now. He's inexperienced, yes, but I would not call him a young player. I think in some ways he is a veteran. He's earned the respect of his teammates, and he has seen what Stetson Bennett went through and the trials and tribulations needed to be overcome to be a national championship winning quarterback. And he, more than I think any individual player we'll talk about tonight, is going to be a big reason why either Georgia does ultimately win or does not win the national championship in this season. Next area I want to touch on here a little bit, the Georgia running game. Even coming into the month of August, I would have said that the running back position was certainly the weakest on the offense and one of the more concerning ones on the team. And since then, you have Kendall Milton dealing with a hamstring injury. You have Daijun Edwards dealing with a sprained MCL, and you have Branson Robinson, who ruptured a patella tendon and is now lost for the season. That leaves Georgia with 2 scholarship running backs, healthy at the very least, to start the 2023 season, and they have a combined 0 games played in their college careers, much less carries. That would be Andrew Paul, who he himself is still returning from a knee injury, and last we had heard he had not been 100% clear to do everything yet. And then obviously the true freshman, Roderick Robinson. You're going to see Georgia get creative with their running game this year. Cass Jones is someone who has had a very strong fall camp and is going to play a role for this team, certainly as a pass catcher. You have Brock Bowers, I think, is someone who in third down situations, you could see Georgia move there in order for them to get Oscar Delp on the field and have just more capable pass catchers and also force defenses to squirm a little bit, because I think that's what Brock Bowers does. Whenever he's in a position that isn't natural or doesn't look natural, you should definitely be worried about that, because I think that's Georgia trying to tell you something. And over the weekend, our friends at Dogs HQ reported that Dylan Bell had been getting snaps at tailback recently this week, and that is more of an emergency thing. But we've seen Georgia do this in the past. They moved Walter Grant from the defensive side of the ball to the running back position, I want to say in 2018. Kyrus Jackson similarly moved from wide receiver to running back. I think Bell has the body type there to sort of, in the event that they don't feel comfortable with what they have at running back, they could maybe turn to Bell a little bit. Though Bell is a guy that I think could have a very big season as a wide receiver, certainly bigger than I think he's being discussed right now, given I think he's maybe seen as maybe a second or third tier option when you have Ladd McConkey and Dominic Lovett on that first tier, and then maybe Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint and Arian Smith on that second tier in terms of wide receivers there. So the Georgia running game, look, last year, even though they haven't had a 1,000-yard rusher, James Cook, Zamir White in 2021, and Kenny McIntosh last year all played huge roles for those Georgia championship teams. McIntosh was the team's third leading receiver, in addition to being the team's leading rusher. In the national championship game, it took Stetson Bennett and the Georgia passing offense a while to get going there. The Georgia ground game, led by Zamir White and led by James Cook, sort of helped keep Georgia in that game. And obviously the offensive line played a big part in that 2022 national championship there as well. But you look at the 2 games that Georgia, at least in the regular season, were 1-score games in the last 2 years. That would be Clemson to open the 2021 season and Missouri last season. Georgia won both of those games, not because their defense made a stop, but because they were able to run the ball effectively in the fourth quarter. And that is going to be something that just has to be done at some point this season. Georgia's not going to bring its A game every single week. No team does. And you're going to have to find ways to win when you put forth a C effort. And so I think not knowing who those running backs are going to be it because of either talent or lack of health, I think is a major storyline that is something that is going to have to be followed throughout the regular season, because while we expect Kendall Milton and Daijun Edwards to be ready to go by that South Carolina game, Kendall Milton may even be ready to go for UT Martin this week. With Milton's injury history and Daijun Edwards starting off and with an injury already, it's something that is going to be a season-long storyline for Georgia. And you saw last year, just when you don't have healthy running backs like Ohio State didn't in the college football playoff against Georgia, that can make you very one-dimensional, and it does ultimately make it easier to beat. And I'd point out in that Ohio State game, they blew it in the fourth quarter, in part because they couldn't run the football effectively because of the lack of running backs that they had back there. So I think that is definitely something that is going to be worth watching all season, even though running backs in general and running games have become a less important part of what Kirby Smart wants to do offensively. Offensive weapons, and I'm going to include wide receivers here, I'm going to include tight ends here, and I'm going to include the offensive line here because I think these are three of the stronger position groups on this Georgia team. I've got a story coming on Brock Bowers that I've worked really hard on and I'm really proud of. You guys can read it tomorrow morning. There's already a video up on YouTube sort of outlining what I did and sort of the idea for the project there. I think he could be the best player in college football. I know Caleb Williams is fantastic. Marvin Harrison Jr. is a dynamic wide receiver. I think when a team needs to have an A game, Brock Bowers' A game might be better than anyone else's A game in the country. And we have seen him do it in the college football playoff. We've seen him do it in the SEC championship game. The one game that he lost, he set a career high in catches with 10, had 139 yards and a touchdown against Alabama. He is as good as it gets, and we don't have a whole lot more to say about him at this point. I think Oscar Delp is a guy that's going to play a lot for Georgia this season. Now, he's going to play as much as Darnell Washington last year. No, probably not. But he's a guy that I'm intrigued by, especially seeing how he develops over the course of the season as he just continues to get more and more reps there on the offensive side of the ball. We've touched a little bit on the wide receivers already tonight. Ladd McConkey, Dominic Lovett, Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint, Arian Smith, Dylan Bell. We haven't even mentioned guys like Ra Thomas, Yazid Haynes, Denylon Morissette. This is easily the deepest group of wide receivers that Georgia has had entering a season. And if they're able to stay healthy and Georgia's able to get a lot out of those guys this season, which I expect, this is easily going to be, in my opinion, the most dynamic passing offense that Kirby Smart has had, is the ability to be explosive while also working the middle and underneath game there. They're going to get guys the ball in space. And if Arian Smith is able to play 15 games for you this season, you have a guy that can consistently take the top off and change the geometry, of the way that the field is split up and defended by opposing teams. That is something that Georgia hasn't always had, in large part because Smith himself hasn't been able to stay healthy. But if he is, they have a game-changing speedster at wide receiver that I think is really going to make an impact this year for Georgia. And then the offensive line, look, they might not win the Joe Moore Award this year. They might just decide to give it to Michigan once again because that's what they've done the last two seasons. This is a very talented offensive line, 1 through 9. It's one the team feels comfortable in. It's one Kirby Smart feels really great in. You've got a lot of guys that have stayed in this program for a while. Cedric Van Pran is entering his third season. Tate Ratledge and Xavier Truss are back as starters at guard. And then you have Amarius Mims, who is as physically impressive as any player, not just on the offensive line, but any player Kirby Smart has had. And he is expected to continue to grow and get better there. Obviously, Georgia's going to have a new left tackle. That'll either be Austin Blasky or Ernest Green. I would expect Green to start the season, and I expect him ultimately to get that job. But Austin Blasky, don't want to combine their names there. Austin Blasky is as good as a sixth lineman as you're going to find in the country, and he'd probably start at a lot of places as well there. And then it's worth mentioning, Kirby Smart touched on this last week, the interior of that line behind them, Dylan Fairchild and Micah Morris at the guard spot and Jared Wilson at the center spot, they feel really good about what they have there. And while they may not see the field a ton here this season, injuries happen from time to time, certainly in the interior of that line. Georgia should feel very, very confident about what it has in the offensive line. And when you're breaking in a new quarterback, that is going to make things very, very important. Next up, defensive line. This has been maybe an interesting back and forth. Kirby Smart has raised questions about whether or not there is a game wrecker in this group. To start the season, there was not an obvious Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis type, guy that this going into the season had a really strong year last year and is poised to become one of the best players in America. I think Michael Williams could do that. He seems to be healthy. We got a chance to talk to him last week. You can check that video out on the DawgNation YouTube page there. He's certainly got the highest ceiling there of anyone. He's a little bit different in the sense that he's more of a true edge player, whereas Carter and Davis were more interior guys there. And while he's not as big and thick as Trayvon Walker is, I do think he's more developed as a pass rusher there. And I think that could be key for Georgia going into this season. Not to mention the seniors that they have on this defensive line, Tramel Walthour, Nazir Stackhouse, Warren Brinson, and Zion Logue. I believe the stat is that they have played 141 games together already in their Georgia careers. That is a ton of football experience, especially for guys of that size and caliber. I think Naz Stackhouse is a guy that is going to potentially be a first-round pick if he has a strong season. I think Warren Brinson and Zion Logue are also guys that are going to hear their names called in next year's NFL draft. It is a really deep defensive line at the top. Now, the question is, how do you develop some of those young guys behind them? Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins is a guy that's going to have to play a good bit this year. He was dealing with a foot injury this offseason. Christian Miller's been banged up a little bit. Georgia's going to need to see him play a good bit here. And then the two freshmen that they have, Jordan Hall and Jamal Jarrett. Every time we've gotten a chance to see practice, Trey Scott has been coaching up Jamal Jarrett noticeably. And that tells me that, look, Jarrett's got a long way to go in terms of, being the next Jordan Davis as he was sort of billed as a recruit. But that tells me that Trey Scott sees that Jarrett has a chance to play this year, and Georgia's going to need him to play this year. And so I would expect at some point this season to see both Jordan Hall and Jamal Jarrett playing for this Georgia defensive line. They've lost a good bit there over the various couple of years now, losing them in the NFL draft, losing Bear Alexander and Sean Washington to the transfer portal, Bill Norton as well there. But this is still a defensive line that, I don't know how many out there. Maybe Ohio State, maybe in Alabama. If that, you would take over what Georgia has here. And yes, there are some concerns, more so than there have been perhaps in years past, but that speaks to where the past level of the Georgia defensive line was. Up next, the secondary here. I think Georgia feels great about what they have back there. Obviously, they're going to wait and see what happens with Kamari Lassiter and his foot and how long that takes to get fully healthy there. We'll see if he plays this week against UT Martin. They have two really strong safeties in Javon Bullard, a guy that just blew up last year in the college football playoff, but was a solid player throughout the 2022 season there. And then Malachi Starks, a guy that really impressed as a freshman right away, and I think is going to continue to grow and get better as he moves into his second season there and really moves into a home at safety, something he didn't have as a high school football player there. I think Julian Humphrey is going to be your starting cornerback against UT Martin, but I would expect Dalen Everett, Nyland Green, that competition, and all those guys to play going into the season. Tyke Smith is going to be your starting star, but over the course of the season, I'd watch out for Janelle Aguero maybe getting more playing time there. Now, he is dealing with a hamstring injury. We don't know how serious it is. It should be worth noted that he was out there running in tennis shoes last week as opposed to wearing cleats. So he might be out for the next couple of weeks. Kirby Smart did not offer up a timeline when hearing from him there. But over the course of the season, I would expect, provided that Janelle Aguero gets healthy, he gets more and more looks in this defense, and that'll be important there as well. So this secondary had some glitches at the end of last season, but I think with the talent that they have there, I think Georgia feels really confident about what this group is going to be able to do going into the season. Yes, you have to replace an All-American in Chris Smith. You have to replace Keely Ringo, who made the most iconic play in school history. But you've got enough talent there with what, Kirby Smart, Will Muschamp, and Fran Brown know as coaches. I think they're going to be able to do just enough, more than just enough, rather, to get the absolute most out of the secondary there. Mike Bobo, there is not a Georgia coach that has more pressure on him this year than Bobo does. He knows what he is stepping into. He is taking over for Todd Monken, one of the most celebrated coaches in the history of the Georgia football program. And Bobo himself knows, I think, better than anyone, the pressures that come with being Georgia's offensive coordinator. Georgia has said they're not going to change too much from going from Todd Monken to Mike Bobo. There may be some slight tweaks, some slight differences that were always going to be the case based on the personnel changes. You see Stetson Bennett moving on to the NFL draft, Darnell Washington there as well. Mike Bobo knows that it is about players, not about plays. He needs to find ways to get the ball to Brock Bowers in space. He needs to find a way to put Carson back in an area where he can succeed consistently, getting the most out of Dominic Lovett, Ladd McConkey, Arian Smith there. Those all sort of fall on the plate of Mike Bobo there. And look, hiring coordinators is a really, really important part of being a head coach, especially when it is an area that is not yours of expertise. For example, defensive-minded guy hiring an offensive coordinator, an offensive-minded guy hiring a defensive coordinator. I think you've seen Lincoln Riley and those offenses at Oklahoma and USC not reach their potential because he has struggled to hire the right defensive coordinator or do the things necessary to get the most out of the defensive side of the ball. You used to be able to say the same thing about Kirby Smart on the offensive side of the ball. I think the Todd Monken hire fixed a lot of that narrative, and we'll see if Georgia's able to keep it moving with Mike Bobo there. And Bobo knows this better than anyone. Mark Richt does as well. When Bobo left after 2014, Georgia went out and hired Brian Schottenheimer. It was an unmitigated disaster. It is one of the biggest reasons that Mark Richt was fired after the 2015 season, simply because the offense fell apart and Georgia struggled, went 9-3 that season. Quite frankly, should have won the SEC East that year, but they found a way not to for a variety of reasons. A lot of things went wrong, but hiring Schottenheimer and making a bad offensive coordinator hire was something that Georgia just wasn't able to overcome in 2015 and ultimately cost Mark Richt his job that season. So Bobo understands that. He knows the pressure that he's walking into. And at the same point in time, he's probably motivated to go out there and know that this is a chance to rewrite the way that a lot of people feel and think about him. And if they go out and win a national championship with Mike Bobo as an offensive coordinator, that's undoubtedly going to feel pretty sweet for him, but also to the fact that it gives him a chance to show that he was always sort of this type of coach, a championship winning caliber coach there. So I think he's someone who, if Carson Beck is the player with the most pressure on him to start this season, I think Mike Bobo is the coach with the most pressure on him to start the season if you're a Georgia football fan. And lastly, and this is hard to quantify, some years you get it, some years you don't. Some people might not like it. Luck. Kirby Smart will admit luck plays a role in winning football games. Every playoff game, really, and for the most part, a lot of the regular season games are seen as game 7 types, and you need luck to go your way. You need bounces to go your way. Now, some would say you make your own luck, and I think Georgia certainly proved that a season ago. But if Noah Ruggles makes a field goal at the end there, Georgia's not trying to three-peat. They're trying to figure out, okay, how do we get back and win another national championship there? Against Missouri, some of the balls don't bounce that way. In 2021, Alabama losing Jameson Williams and John Mechie. That was bad luck for them. Some things that you can control, some things you can't. Look, Georgia last year was able to weather injuries to Nolan Smith, Darnell Washington, and Warren McClendon in that first college football playoff game. You make your own luck sometimes. And look, there are going to be moments where things get tight for Georgia this season, and we're going to have to make a few plays there, and a ball is going to need to bounce it one way, or a guy's going to be able to make a catch. And if he can, Georgia's probably going to win a whole lot. If he can't, then that's the way it goes. Last year, Alabama, a little unlucky in losing the games in the manner in which they did, but at the same point in time, you can make an argument they were lucky to beat Ole Miss, Texas A&M, and Texas with how close those games were. So certainly something that I think any football fan, any football coach, while they may not want to acknowledge it, to win a championship, which is what Georgia is trying to do this season, you need a little bit of luck. And you can manufacture it your own way. You can do a lot to prevent and mitigate against that. Georgia has played 2 one-score regular season games in the last 2 seasons. I think Alabama played 5 a season ago. You reduce the impact that luck has in your season by taking care of business and beating teams you're just better than instead of messing around with. Georgia's done a great job of that the last couple of seasons. It'll be interesting to see with some of the changes they've had to make if they're going to be able to do that once again in the 2023 college football season there. And so we sort of run through the big topics, the big names to know who has pressure on them, which position groups need to step up, which are facing major question marks there. And so with that in mind, let's turn it over to you guys. Comments, questions, ask away. We'll try and answer as many of these as we can. I'm sure you've got thoughts, comments, whatever you want to say, talk about. We will certainly get into that there. Let's see. Yeah, Saturday, first game of the season. Cannot wait for it. We get back in the room. Obviously, I think I'll be the first to admit I wish Georgia was playing someone better than UT Martin and certainly Ball State in week 2. You would like to see more marquee opponents to start a season. But hey, the fact that we get football back in full swing, I'm sure there were a lot of people on here who watched it last night and enjoyed it. And I think certainly, again, you're going to see that this coming weekend. Ken Feinberg asking about Jackson Meeks. He has an issue with his foot. So we will find out, how long he is out for in terms of an injury. Not a break, but sort of a stress reaction, as what Kirby Smart had said. Let's see. Do I agree that Bama will win the SEC championship? I personally don't. I think Georgia's going to beat Alabama. I think it would mean a lot to Kirby Smart to finally, get that sort of monkey off his back and beat Alabama in the SEC championship game. I could certainly see Alabama winning it. They have a lot of talent, and I think that they're trying to change the way that they play this season to better fit that talent. But as some have pointed out, look, Bryce Young was maybe the best player in college football last season. Certainly, I think the most impactful, and he covered up a lot of warts for that Alabama team. And when you go from a player that great to a player that you have major question marks about, whether it be Jalen Milroe, Ty Simpson, or Tyler Buckner, we're here, some teams have already started their season. We still don't know who Alabama's quarterback is, and Alabama may not even know who Alabama's quarterback is going to be. And that's going to be something where you look at the teams that have beaten Georgia, or at least given Georgia a lot of trouble. Ohio State last year, Alabama in 2021, Alabama in 2020, Florida in 2020, LSU in 2019. All those teams had elite quarterback play. The dual threat narrative may not be there, but Kyle Trask, Joe Burrow, Mac Jones, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud all put up big numbers and played really, really well against Georgia secondaries that had NFL athletes. Is Alabama's quarterback capable of doing that this season? Based on the answer right now, I don't know that, and I don't think we're going to know that until the day of the game. David Wayne Carroll, offensive line versus defensive line, which is stronger offensive line here. The defensive line I like more than I think some people do, but this offensive line I think is the best in the country. And if you see what Georgia does there, I think it's going to make this whole offense run and make things very, very easy for Carson Beck. Jerry Dogs fan, yes. So Jeff Sentell has a YouTube video up on NICAR. He had another monster game on Friday for Colquitt County. I think 4 touchdowns on 9 catches. For some of the concerns about the wide receiver position in terms of recruiting this offseason, Mike Matthews, an incredibly talented player for Parkview. He's going to Tennessee. Some of the other 5-star prospects that Georgia has swung and missed on at that position. Nikar, Nitro Tuggle, and don't forget Sokovia White, who Jeff Sentell has also highlighted and was at his game on Friday. Those guys are all really, really good football players, and they're really productive. And so I think that is certainly something where, yeah, maybe you miss on some higher ranked guys, but still with the wide receiver class that they're bringing in, I think Georgia feels very good about what they have. Let's see. Thoughts, comments, questions here. Let's see. Scrolling. I will share my my college football playoff 4 teams. I have Georgia back in the college football playoff. I have Michigan, but I'm starting to maybe be inclined to pick Ohio State because a lot of people are now picking Michigan, and I might try and zag there. I've got Clemson coming out of the ACC as a 1-loss team. I think that they're going to find a way to win that conference, and if they go 12-1 to win the ACC, more often than not, we've seen that team get into the college football playoff. And look, maybe this is wish casting. Maybe, it's thoughtful thinking. The Pac-12 is really good this year. And I would like to see the 1-loss champion from that. If there's a 1-loss Pac-12 champion, that team is getting in the college football playoff. And I think right now Washington's the best team in the Pac-12. USC looked like more the same with what we saw last night. And yes, it's a small sample size, but I like what that Washington team has with what they bring back. Yes, everyone's going to point to Michael Penix and him coming back for another year. They have some really talented wide receivers out there in Seattle. And I think Kalen DeBoer, look, that guy has won everywhere that he has been as a head coach. And I would expect big things again from Washington this season. And so I've got Michigan, Georgia, Clemson, and Washington. And if those are the 4 teams in the college football playoff, I am telling you right now, Georgia is winning the national title once again. Now, if an Ohio State is in there, maybe if an Alabama or an LSU squeak in there, a Texas team that I like, maybe some like them more than I do, I think those are teams that could maybe give Georgia trouble. One team that is maybe getting a little too much love for me, Florida State. Yes, they have a lot of talent and made some strides last year. That team still lost 3 games, and the losses they had were games, quite frankly, that I don't think that they should have lost, and they found a way to lose them. And so until I see, Florida State winning and winning handily, and look, we're going to learn a lot about them right off the bat when they play an LSU team in week 1 there. So I think that is certainly something to watch there. But an LSU team, Florida State team, I'm just not as high on as others. One team that maybe I'm interested in the more I think about it, again, I just wish we knew a little bit more about their quarterback. Penn State, they have some dudes. And yes, they have to play Ohio State and Michigan, and they have really struggled against Michigan of late. But that is a Penn State team that, look, they've shown they can take care of everyone else on their schedule. The biggest question is just how do they match up with Ohio State and Michigan? And is there a world where maybe they split against those 2 teams and they don't have to play in the Big Ten title game and they benefit from that and get in as a non-champion, college football playoff team, something we've seen plenty of teams, Georgia even, have benefited from there. So certainly something to watch there as well. Robert Louis Bailey, Ellis Robinson had a sweet interception this weekend. That guy, regardless of position, might be the number 1 player in the country in terms of what he does and is able to do. Let's see. Francisco, I think this is a fair point. The offense is going to look very different without Darnell Washington. I think he opened a lot of things up for this team and forced teams to play a style that they were not accustomed to seeing on a week-in, week-out basis. And so, while yes, Oscar Delp is someone who I think is going to have a good season and going to continue to progress and get better over the year, Darnell was unique for a reason, and his uniqueness will not be easily replaced or replaced at all. Let's see. Joseph Wilson, yes, I do think Georgia's defense is going to hold up. I think it's going to ultimately end up being better than it was a season ago. And maybe the biggest reason why is, Georgia's best defenses have always been led by their linebackers. And with what they have at that inside linebacker position this year, now obviously Smile London needs to get healthy as he continues to recover from a foot injury. I think if Georgia were playing a bigger opponent week 1, week 2, maybe we see him, but I would not expect him to be a full go against UT Martin. I think that, if you're Georgia, Jamon Dumas-Johnson is an All-American type player, maybe even a Butkus type player. Shimon London I would include there as well. I thought to end last season, Shimon London was better than Jamon Dumas-Johnson. And that's nothing against Jamon. That speaks to what I was seeing from Shimon London. Xavier Sori has had as good an offseason as anyone has in this Georgia program. And I've spoken very highly before about Jalen Walker and what he brings. CJ Allen has made an impact as a freshman right away there. They're really, really deep at that inside linebacker position. And you look at Georgia's best teams that get to the national championship game, that 2017 team, that 2021 team, were led by their inside linebackers in that defense. Last year's wasn't to an extent. I think Chris Smith was the leader of that defense, and he was a phenomenal player, someone who was certainly, I think, going to be missed. But with what Georgia's defense has at that linebacker position, I think that is going to make things very, very easy for them. Lucy Bowers Boykin. I like it. Some of the preliminary data back, it's eliminated about 6-7 plays a game, but it only shaved about a minute off of the actual game time. So what does that mean? We're essentially getting more commercials from a TV product, and we're making the game marginally safer for players. I'm okay with the fact that I believe Peter Burns was the one who did the math on this. If the week 1 data holds up over the course of a season, you essentially eliminate one game played by the number of snaps you've eliminated, which I think is a good thing. But again, if we're getting, bloated TV runtimes because of these commercials and it's allowing these corporate sponsors to insert more into that, I don't know if that makes the product any better. One of the things that I enjoy certainly about watching soccer, F1 for the most parts, is you get these things done in 2 hours tops. And so I'll be interested in seeing how that goes there. I do think it'll be Georgia and Alabama in the SEC championship game. I'm not a big believer right now in LSU. I think a team that could be really interesting is A&M, and I could certainly see that being a team that could possibly win the West. I could also see them coming in last in the SEC West. They have as high a ceiling and as low a floor as anyone in this conference. Let's see. We'll do a few more questions before heading out of there. Adam Butts, Mekhi Muse, will he be Georgia's return guy? I don't know yet. Kirby Smart has been very vague about who that might be. They've thrown out a number of guys there. Ladd McConkey, Dominic Lovett, Anthony Evans, a freshman there. They have a lot of guys that could possibly fill that role. I do think that Mekhi Muse is going to play for this team this season, certainly on special teams, but even on offense there as well. A guy that has just continued to make plays. You saw him do it in the spring game. He's done it in a couple of the scrimmages there. That is going to be a guy that just because he's a walk-on, he's going to play a good amount for Georgia this year. Let's see. We'll maybe do 2-3 more questions here before calling it a night. We got a busy week here around DawgNation. Let's see. Yeah, and I've seen some talk about the college game day pick. Look, I'll at least give Kirk Herbstreit credit. He's been out in front that he thinks this Alabama team is going to win it all summer. So I would expect that from him. Desmond Howard, we don't talk enough about his playoff picks from last year. The Texas A&M one was famous for flaming out, and Baylor fell flat on its face as well there. But he had Pitt, as the ACC champion and as a team getting into the playoff. Just very, very strange. He picked Brock Bowers to win the Heisman, but he doesn't have Georgia in the college football playoff. I'm very befuddled by how that ends up happening because I think, as talented as Brock is, and I think he's going to put up big numbers this season, his best case is he's the best player on the best team in the country, and sometimes that's not enough. You saw last year Caleb Williams win the award, even though he was on a USC team that didn't end up going into the college football playoff. Sometimes there are just guys that are that spectacular that capture the imagination, and Brock even acknowledges that, it's a quarterback-driven award, and he's not a quarterback. Now, could we see him drop back and throw some passes this year? I wouldn't necessarily rule it out. I think he's good and can do everything. So I think that's certainly something to watch there. Let's see. Maybe do one. Yeah, Randy Hall. This is a good question. I don't know. I don't know the answer to this. He's going to play on third downs as a pass rusher. It would not surprise me if he, certainly in the second half of these games where Georgia's up big, he plays a lot at inside linebacker because that is ultimately his long-term home there. Again, I say this slightly. I said this on our happy hour, which is going to be live at the Marlowe's in Brookhaven on Thursday. Make sure to join us for that from 5 to 7 there. I think Jalen Walker could be like Harold Perkins this year and have that kind of an impact, and I wouldn't bat an eye on it. I think he is that good to me. That is a tough problem for Glenn Schumann to have to try and solve there. Randy Hall, who does field goals and kickoffs? Right now, I would say it's Jared Zirkle, but it would not surprise me if this is a battle that continues into the season and we do see Peyton Woodring maybe ultimately progress there. I think Zirkle has maybe had the better fall camp, and with that in mind, I do think that is ultimately why he gets the starting job to start the season. Let's see. G Bama boy. For this to be the case, Georgia and Alabama are going to have to get through the regular season undefeated. And I think they've got enough talent to do that, but doing that in actuality is a good bit harder. And even with, that being the case, Georgia's probably going to need to win that first game, just given some of the concerns that are going to exist about their schedule. Whereas if Alabama gets to 12-0 with the schedule that they play, Texas, LSU, Tennessee, at Texas A&M, in my opinion, they'll probably already be a college football playoff team, regardless of the result there. Now, if they have a loss, again, haven't seen a 2-loss team get into the college football playoff there. And so I think that is certainly something where if Georgia and Alabama are both going to get into the college football playoff, they're both going to have to be undefeated going to the SEC championship game, which could happen, but I don't believe have seen that happen yet. I think the last time that happened would have been 2009, Alabama, Florida, which Alabama won and Florida ended up losing. We won't spend a second here talking about that PR puff piece that was the Netflix documentary. I just don't watch Netflix documentaries anymore. And when it comes to sports, they're not very good or factual, and they very clearly tell one side of a story instead of a more complete picture. So you know what? I can't end on that. I can't end on the god awful Florida documentary. So let's do one more question. G Bama boy, look, I was here for Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley was phenomenal. Brock Bowers is better than Todd Gurley. No disrespect to Todd. I love Todd. Todd is the coolest player that Georgia's ever had. Brock Bowers is better than Todd Gurley. On offense, who's one player that isn't being talked about enough that could be a difference maker? David, I love this question. We've discussed him already tonight. I think it's Arian Smith. If you get 15 games out of Arian Smith, I think Georgia's winning the national championship because his speed is that significant. I've never seen a single play flip a game in person. Now, obviously, there are, the David Tyree catch in the Super Bowl against the Patriots. There are examples of this, but in person, I've never felt a game flip more than Arian Smith's touchdown against Ohio State in the fourth quarter last year. It felt like it went from, maybe Georgia can score here, get the ball back enough time, maybe they can find a way to win this, to, oh, this is a full-blown game, and Ohio State is very much in trouble right now. And I think if you're able to get a fully healthy season from Arian, his speed is that game-breaking. Georgia's going to be able to hit him deep, and they're going to be able to do a lot of different things with him. I think that's a guy that, even though he's not going to start for Georgia, I don't expect him to be one of their top 3 pass catchers. I think he's a guy that is going to have a huge, huge impact on what this team ultimately does. That is a great last question, David. Thank you so much for asking it there. And so with that, fit about the 40-minute mark here. We got a busy week here at DawgNation as we move into full-blown game week. Georgia opens against UT Martin on Saturday, 6 o'clock. ESPN Plus, you're going to have to be able to stream that game to be able to watch it. It is not going to be broadcast over the air. We will have a video showing you how to do that. We'll have plenty more throughout the week. Mike Griffith on the beat Monday night. Brandon Adams, DawgNation Daily every Monday through Friday. Jeff Sintel before the hedges on Wednesday. DawgNation Happy Hour live at Marlowe's Tavern on Thursday. Make sure to stop by if you're in the area to watch us there. So for Connor Riley, I've got a story coming tomorrow on DawgNation about Brock Bowers. I encourage you to read it. I've worked really hard on it. A lot of great stories in there about what makes Brock Bowers great and what his best ability ultimately is. Really proud of how the story turned out, so make sure to check it out there. For Connor Riley and DawgNation, this has been another edition of Connor in Coverage. The next time we see you on this show, we'll be wrapping up Georgia's first game against UT Martin, almost certainly a win, and previewing Georgia's Week 2 game against Ball State, which will almost certainly also be a win. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. My name is Connor Riley. This has been a DawgNation production.